Okay. Just need to check on something.
I demand a bigger desk.
All right, why don't we get started? Welcome to the Legislative Committee on Administrative Rules, meeting on December 14th, 2023. Before we get started here, we'll do introductions.
Anthony Dexter Cooper from the Office of Legislative Counsel.
Chris Bray from Bristol, representing the Addison Center District.
Representative Mark Higley from Lowell, represent the Orleans-Lamoille District.
Representative Seth Baumgartz, I represent the towns of Arlington's Sandgate, Chester, and part of Sunderland.
Ginny Lyons, Senator representing Chittenden Southeast.
Mark McDonald, Senator representing most Orange County.
Trevor Squirrel, representing Underhill and Jericho, and over here.
Charlene Vindo, Committee Assistant. Shire Administrative Assistant.
Okay, first up are the approval of the minutes from November 30th, 2023. Senator Bray.
So moved.
We have a motion to approve. Any discussion? All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye. I'd like to clarify, Mr. Chair.
Yes.
I was not here. I was across the hall in another meeting. But it is appropriate for me to vote in favor of the minutes, or, yes.
You can if you want to. Sometimes people
do.
who are not here choose to abstain.
Thank you. First up is Rule 23P18, Vermont Public Utility Commission, Rule 5.400. Petitions to construct electric and gas facilities pursuant to 30 VSA 248. John Cotter, staff, what? There you go there. So we'll give you the floor and we'll go from there.
Okay, good morning. My name is John Cotter. I'm a staff attorney and deputy general counsel at the Public Utility Commission. I'm here this morning to continue presentation of the Commission's proposed amendments to Commission Rule 5.400, governing the process for seeking review of projects subject to 30 VSA Section 248. As most of the committee knows, I was here 2 weeks ago. I gave a fairly lengthy presentation on the amendments to the rule, and we engaged in some question and answer time. I think rather than repeating many of the things I said before, we did file responsive comments as well on Monday after the meeting in November. I thought I would just make myself available for questions and try to answer them as best as I can before the committee moves on the question of whether or not to approve the amendments. Thank you.
Committee? Senator Bray.
Good morning. Good to see you again.
Good morning.
Could you just explain a little further, we differentiate between party status and the scope of the items upon which someone new party, by virtue of the change to rules, would be able to intervene. And then we talked about sort of a gateway role that the PUC plays. Can you say a little more about it? I think there is some, some of the anxiety I'm hearing is over the scope of the intervention and the implications of having more interveners intervening on more subjects that then add to time and expense to go through the process.
Sure. I think first, the first limiting factor is Section 248 itself. The commission is not going to be entertaining testimony or exhibits or any kind of offered evidence that fall outside the scope of Section 248. So that's your first limiting factor. Your second limiting factor is that the rule amendments, 5.409, I believe, is the section that governs intervention. While they allow a limited list of persons and entities to use a notice process as opposed to a motion process. So I want to put some emphasis on that. It's a limited list of people and entities that can use this. It still requires them to identify with specificity the issues that they wish to actively participate on. And then other parties would have an opportunity to respond and say, that's not appropriate that they participate on that. They don't actually have that interest. And the commission also retained its ability in the amendments under Rule 2.209C, which is the general intervention rule, to restrict people's participation to specific issues, to require them to join together with other people in the presentation of evidence or conduct of discovery. So for example, if you had a group of adjoining landowners, if they all appeared to have basically the same interests, the commission could exercise its discretion to say, you know what, you need to pick a spokesperson to present testimony, for example, so that there would only be one witness that discovery needed to be served upon, or one witness that would need cross-examination. So I think, I mean, I understand anytime you change something, you know, people get a little bit nervous, but I don't think that the concerns are going to come to be realized. So, you know, and the other thing I spoke about is that I don't think people are going to say, someone who would look at a proposed project and say, I don't have any concerns over this project. I'm an adjoining landowner, but I can't see it from my house. It's on the other side of a huge hedgerow. You know, I don't drive by it. I'm not worried about sound. I don't care about this thing. They're not suddenly going to go, you know what, I'm going to intervene in this case and oppose this project because I can do it by notice intervention as opposed to having to file a motion. I've been doing this for 24 years and I just don't see that happening. Respectfully to the folks who are concerned about it.
Can you say just a little more, please, about the, if there were many adjoining landowners? I think we heard about a case where there might be up to like 50, more than 50. Mm-hmm. What's the process whereby one becomes the spokesperson for the many as opposed to having 50 more interveners party?
Right. I mean, I do recall that comment, and what came to mind is that sounded like, because I believe it was probably a solar project, because it was either Mr. Clark or Mr. Dowds who brought it up. I would have to imagine that what was adjacent to that project was, for example, a large condominium complex or something to that effect. So I think bringing that up as an indication that a small project having a large number of adjoining landowners is very rare indeed. But in that case, if numerous landowners wanted to intervene, they would file their notices of intervention, and then it would be up to the commission to figure out honestly how to control that, because it would need some controlling. There was another comment 2 weeks ago that suggested that as soon as there are interveners in a commission case opposed to a project, that the case just spins out of control. And it takes an excessive amount of time. It becomes excessively expensive. But I will acknowledge we have had cases that do become long and they do become more expensive. But again, I think that's the exception, not the rule. The commission does its best, and I think it does so pretty effectively the vast majority of the time, controlling cases where you do end up with numerous parties.
Thanks. I do want to also acknowledge that the legislature has passed bills and worked with the PUC in prior sessions to say, can we make the process more transparent and accessible to the public at large? So I appreciate that this is not coming out of nowhere. It's the PUC's response to earlier legislation.
I appreciate that.
Just a follow-up comment on that. Act 174 that was passed in 2016 was very much involved in elaborating and helping to ensure public comment from a variety of people, not just specific people. So it's been, so I think Act 174 has improved what's going on. This looks like another step in that direction.
Yes, we did have a discussion, I think it was with Representative Squirrel 2 weeks ago about how this was really another step in a process that has been in place ever since Act 174 was passed, the development of electronic filing.
I was just going to say, along with the IT and
Yes, and publishing quite a few documents to our website that explain to people everything from who we are, what we do, to here are the different types of cases, and here's how your voice can be heard. So it's part of a long process.
Any other comments? Senator Bray?
Well, if there's no further discussion, I know that in conversations inside and out of this committee, you'll always want to keep a bright line between what's like a policy ruling. And I think if there are implications for this rule change that some folks see as a policy question, then it seems like it's an appropriate thing to bring to a legislative committee. And that Lcar, from speaking with our council, there is a history of allowing the PUC discretion in procedural matters, and that this fits within the scope of that discretion, and that there's a history for doing this. So I would, move, Mr. Chair, approval of Rule 23P18. Any further discussion?
I just would like to make a comment to follow on Senator Bray's comment that I appreciate Legislative Council. One of the reasons why we delayed till this meeting was to get some feedback from Legislative Council on some concerns, or at least better understand the authority that the PUC had in this particular rulemaking. And I think a lot of them, or most of our concerns have been responded to by the memorandum from Ledge Council. So I just wanted to follow that on. Representative Higgy?
Mr. Chair, if I could just briefly, I mentioned this to you this morning, but as a member from Lowell, Vermont, we had our huge wind project up there, which, I supported through a vote from the town, but it was obvious to me that there was a lot of issues around maybe folks that weren't involved right off, and it can be costly in that regard too. So I certainly support the efforts of the PUC to try to include more folks in that process. So I'll be supporting the motion.
Okay. Thank you. We have a motion to approve Rule 23P18. Any more discussion? All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Okay, next up, we have Rule 23P19, Vermont Public Utility Commission, 5.100, rule pertaining to construction and operation of net metering system, known as the net metering rule. And Jake Marin, staff attorney for PUC. Floor is yours.
Thank you, sir. Good morning. My name is Jake Marin. I'm a Deputy General Counsel and hearing officer for the Vermont Public Utility Commission. I'm here this morning to present the Commission's proposed amendments to Commission Rule 5.100, the rule governing the construction and operation of net metering systems. I realize that there are several other witnesses that wish to speak in our limited time today. So with the committee's permission, I would like to take a moment to just summarize the proposed rule changes and then take a few minutes to address at a high level the areas of concern identified by the other witnesses. For more specific responses to those concerns, I refer the committee to the detailed response to comments document that the Commission provided to the committee with its filing paperwork. The proposed amendments serve 5 primary purposes. First, they streamline and simplify the process for receiving a certificate of public good under Section 248. Second, the rule clarifies the relationship between the net metering certificate of public good process and the interconnection rule that was reviewed in the previous meeting. Third, the rule makes changes to the definition of preferred sites, including placing limits on the amount of forest clearing associated with preferred sites. Fourth, the amendments address the rates applicable to the expansion of existing net metering systems. Fifth and finally, the amendments update the transfer and extension requirements for certificates of public good. The majority of the testimony today appears to be aimed at the Commission's proposal to limit forest clearing on preferred sites to no more than 3 acres. These comments argue that the Commission's proposal is arbitrary. The Administrative Procedure Act states that a rule is arbitrary when there is no factual basis for the decision made by the agency. The decision made by the agency is not rationally connected to the factual basis asserted for the decision, or the decision made by the agency would not make sense to a reasonable person. I'll start with the factual basis for the underlying rule. Section 8010 of Title 30 of the Vermont statutes directs the Commission to adopt net metering rules that advance Vermont's renewable energy and greenhouse gas requirements, achieves a level of net metering deployment consistent with a comprehensive energy plan. To the extent feasible, ensures that net metering does not shift costs between net metering customers and other customers, accounts for all costs and benefits of net metering, allows customers to participate in net metering, accounts for changes over time in the cost of technology, and addresses the ownership of renewable energy credits. This is a long list of policy considerations, and some of them are in tension with each other. The legislature gave the Commission a roadmap of these broad policy directions, but asked the Commission to fill in many details. Net metering is an incentive program that has costs. And in fact, net metering is one of the most expensive types of renewable energy developed in Vermont. The net metering rule includes guardrails that ensure the costs and benefits of net metering are balanced. These guardrails ensure that the pace of net metering deployment is controlled to protect Vermont ratepayers. A key element of the current net metering rule is the concept of preferred sites. Preferred sites are areas where the Commission seeks to promote the beneficial development of net metering because the sites have fewer environmental and land use impacts. Examples of preferred sites include brownfields, parking lots, roofs, and land close to the load served by the net metering system. Preferred sites receive greater net metering compensation than sites that are not preferred, and facilities greater than 150 kilowatts must be on preferred sites to participate in the net metering program because net metering offers owners of net metering systems greater financial benefits than would be otherwise available to other types of generators of that size. Facilities greater than 150 kilowatts can be constructed on sites that are preferred, but they must be developed outside the net metering program through a lower priced mechanism, such as a competitive utility contract. Since the net metering rule was last revised in 2017, the Commission has noticed that many large net metering facilities have moved to previously disturbed sites, like gravel pits. This is what the Commission hoped the rule would do. However, not all projects followed this trend. Some projects have been located in undeveloped areas and required significant areas of forest clearing. This concerned the Commission because these projects are not consistent with the rule's intent to drive development in areas that have reduced environmental impacts. The Commission realized that the net metering program was still providing incentives for developers to clear significant areas of forest. In response to this issue, the Commission engaged with stakeholders through this rulemaking. After reviewing data from the net metering applications received over the past few years, provided by the Agency of Natural Resources, the Commission learned that the vast majority of net metering applications did not involve any forest clearing or only a small amount. However, a few dozen projects accounted for a disproportionate amount of forest clearing. The Commission also found that this subset of net metering projects tended to clear significantly more forest per megawatt of installed capacity than larger, competitively priced projects like standard offer projects. The Commission also learned that Vermont is steadily losing forest every year, and while net metering projects only account for a small portion of that forest loss, the Commission determined that there was no good reason for the net metering program to contribute to forest loss. The Commission concluded that a limit on the amount of clearing associated with a project was a reasonable response to these facts. The Commission originally considered a more stringent limitation of 1 acre per project, but ultimately revised its proposal to a 3 acre limitation. This number was chosen after reviewing application data and balancing the goals of protecting forests while also trying to minimize the impact of the rule on the pace of net metering deployment. Ultimately, the Commission believes this rule will not affect a significant number of projects because most projects can be designed to avoid clearing less than 3 acres. While the rule does not eliminate all forest loss associated with net metering, it will protect larger areas of contiguous forest from being converted for net metering. The Commission's definition of forest is based on good science and uses the U.S. Forest Service's definition of forest. The definition is crafted to ensure that single trees or small clumps of trees do not count as forest, and that only contiguous areas of trees greater than 1 acre count towards the overall 3 acre limitation. A reasonable person would understand the need for this rule. We should not give developers financial incentives to construct net metering systems in areas that require significant forest clearing when it's not needed. Vermont pays a premium for net metering power, and that premium should be used to encourage the development of net metering projects on truly preferred sites like roofs or previously disturbed areas. Renewable Energy Vermont and other witnesses have argued that the rule should only prohibit sites that are affirmatively demonstrated to result in an increase in atmospheric CO2 over the project's expected lifespan. As the Commission explained in its written response to these comments, this framing of the issue assumes a false choice between clearing forests or constructing net metering systems. There's been no demonstration that it's not feasible to construct net metering systems without forest clearing. Even if it were the case that Vermont must clear forests to build sufficient new renewable energy projects to meet our greenhouse gas reduction requirements, then those projects should not participate in net metering. They should participate in another lower cost program for the benefit of Vermont ratepayers. Thank you. This concludes my prepared remarks on this issue, but I'm happy now to take any questions the committee may have about this rule or any other issues raised by the comments. Thank you.
Ready for motion? Senator Bray?
Good morning, Mr. Mayor. Good to see you.
Good morning.
So having participated from the beginning in this preferred locations, preferred sites work, all for it. I do have a question about, does the PUC have an obligation or a duty to minimize the impact on forested areas? I can appreciate how you might, from a common sense point of view, look to do that. But is there a duty to do that expressed in law in some way?
Yes. First, the commission is required or is given the responsibility under Section 248 to ensure that all generation facilities are in the public interest. And that includes ensuring that any impacts to the environment are not undue. Undue means unjustified or unnecessary. And so that is exactly the kind of policy weighing determination that the commission does in any case, which is you're looking at the costs and benefits of a project and you're saying, is this necessary? Is this appropriate? Does this promote the public interest? Given that this is an incentive program, one that ratepayers pay extra for, it did not seem consistent with the notion of preferred sites to drive just this limited number of projects into areas that are undeveloped forest areas. Now, the rule is very much focused on only sort of larger areas of contiguous forest. And so it does not treat all areas of forest equally. It does not penalize folks for having to clear a few trees necessary to, construct their project. What this really is looking at is areas of forest greater than 1 acre at least, and totaling no more than 3 acres on a single site. So this is the kind of subject that's right within the commission's Section 248 policy wheelhouse.
Thank you. And the argument that lifetime emissions associated or emissions reductions that could be associated with any particular project, is that a metric you consider in these proceedings already?
We did. The commission always considers the impact of its rules on greenhouse gas emissions. I think we're required by law to do that. The way that issue has been framed, I think, by some of the participants in this rulemaking is that the decision is either we build a net metering project in an area that's cleared or no net metering project gets built at all. And that's not the way the commission sees it. Vermont law requires the utilities to obtain a certain amount of renewable energy every year. And so if one project is not constructed, then the utilities still have an obligation to obtain renewable energy from somewhere else, and they will. And so also, the vast majority of net metering projects already are constructed without clearing forests. There isn't a shortage of sites to build. So really, we're steering where the net metering development is going to go, not whether it's going to happen necessarily.
Senator Lyons.
And so along those lines, your analysis of greenhouse gas and sequestration of carbon within the forest, is that something that's taken into account over time, what's lost versus what might be gained through renewable energy?
The commission certainly is, thinking about how does this rule affect Vermont's greenhouse gas reductions. But in terms of how much is sequestered in a forest, the commission recognizes that forests can sequester various amounts of carbon depending on the composition of the forest, its state of succession. And this rule does not treat forests differently based on that amount. The commission, again, is rationale more is that there is not a need to clear this forest while still meeting our greenhouse gas reduction goals. And I think everyone can agree that any forest has some benefit from carbon sequestration. So, protecting those forests will have some carbon benefit.
Talk about it after a while.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Next up, we have Jonathan Dowds, Deputy Director, Renewable Energy Vermont.
Thank you. I'm Jonathan Dowds, the Deputy Director of Renewable Energy Vermont. Mr. Marin has anticipated many of my comments, but I think we ultimately disagree on some of the implications of this rule and whether or not it falls into that arbitrary bucket. First, just up front, I want to note they'll be talking about two things here. The first is that change the preferred siting criteria, which would limit tree clearing. And I'm also going to touch on changes to the compensation for expanded net metering systems. Starting with the forest clearing provisions, we do indeed believe that this 3-acre threshold is an arbitrary approach to protecting forests and that it impinges on local control. In an additional manner that a site can become a preferred site is by getting a joint letter from the local and regional planning commission. These are entities that have insight into local conditions on the ground and can select affirmatively to designate a site to be a preferred site. This would limit their ability to do that. So it does also limit this local control that has been an area of legislative focus for enhanced energy plans over the last several years. The broad justification for this 3-acre rule is that forests provide important climate and habitat benefits. While this is true in broad strokes, and we 100% believe in the need to protect Vermont's forests, it fails to recognize the very differential climate and habitat values that you get from an acre of forest, depending on things like the size, composition, age of the trees that are there, and how it plays into habitat connectivity. So we think a more science-based rule will be looking at a site-by-site basis at both those climate and habitat values. I'm going to speak briefly on climate and then pivot to habitat. On climate, as in our letter to Lcar, we cited a couple of studies that talk about what that carbon balance is. And according to Synapse Energy Economics, clearing an acre of forest, this is New England forest specifically, for solar, results in 15 times the annual carbon reductions that you would get from leaving it in forest. So this is a pretty significant carbon savings from this conversion process. Whether or not you might get a slightly higher carbon saving in another place, this becomes, I believe, a policy-making decision by Lcar that they're going to set some thresholds here for what is effective climate policy. I think that's something that's more appropriately in the legislative domain. But getting specifically to that, so we don't see a climate justification for limiting these sites. On habitat, again, habitat value is inherently tied to things like the species diversity that is there, how disrupted the forest is, how connected it is to other forest lands to help animal migration. This rule does not consider that at all. There are already several mechanisms in the permitting process that allow the Agency of Natural Resources to weigh in on these important issues. They're allowed to talk about whether or not it has an undue adverse impact on the environment, whether or not there's necessary wildlife habitat on a site, whether there are rare and irreplaceable natural areas on a site. So there's already significant site-specific requirements to assess the habitat value of any parcel that is going up for a CPG. the types of sites that I have seen looking through larger net metering applications over the last several years that will trigger this threshold are sites that have been recently logged, that have common communities, that are immediately adjacent to major roadways, that are bisected by power lines, and that the Agency of Natural Resources in many cases has weighed in on these cases specifically. They have not found any undue adverse impact on the environment. Why 3 acres becomes the threshold rather than doing something that is, in our view, more science-based and more site-specific is why we believe that this is an arbitrary restriction. If we wanted to talk specifically about habitat quality, that's something that REV would support. Simply taking a blanket approach that says local municipalities, regional planning commissions, you cannot designate these sites as preferred sites, regardless of how they fit into your local development plans, is something that we think is misguided. I want to touch on a few things that Mr. Marin mentioned. While it is true that the vast majority of net metering sites do not impact forest clearing, we're also talking about projects on different scales here. The vast majority of net metering projects are sub 15 kW, they're on people's rooftops. These are terrific projects. We are highly supportive of them. There are many people who cannot access solar via panels on their rooftop, either because they do not own their home is not in an area that is conducive to solar, because of shading, because of the orientation of their home, things of that nature. And the only way that these individuals can access the benefits of net metering is through off-site projects, community solar arrays. These are larger projects that provide more power to many households. So in our assessment, if you look at the share of capacity in these larger projects that was impacted in this, rather than simply the number of sites that are impacted, we were looking at over a quarter of these community scale solar projects, the capacity of these community scale solar projects would have been impacted by this 3 acre threshold over the last several years. I think it's also worth noting that there is concern that percentage will increase over time as given the contentiousness around the aesthetics process and other factors like that, enabled in some measure by the PUC, who's made some strange decisions in the aesthetics arena, overriding expert testimony by both the developer and the Department of Public Service in some cases to deem a site be aesthetically unfit. There is pressure to find sites that are less visible. And so that is one of the things that is pushing some of this to treat areas. Before I wrap on this, I just want to really reiterate this 10% canopy cover, no consideration of age. We can be talking about a site that has been heavily logged and has saplings on it that has very limited habitat value, where essentially from a carbon perspective, you are putting it in a field, and that would be impacted by this. We haven't seen a justification for 3 acres. We have heard that as a policy matter, the PUC is concerned with forest clearing for net metering. We'd like to see this done in a more thoughtful and science-based manner than simply a 3 acre yes or no threshold. We don't think that captures the dynamics of what is happening on the ground. I'd like to pivot for just a minute to the issue of compensation for expanded systems. What the PUC has proposed is that if you have an existing system and you amend it, you add additional capacity to it, the compensation that entire system receives will be set with the current adjusters. In practice, what that means is if you had a system that you built in 2017 and you add a new system today because of the way those adjusters have gone down, you will get 6 cents less per kilowatt hour for the electricity that you're generating on your existing system. That makes it extremely difficult for a system expansion to be financially viable, even though these expansions are already on areas that are impacted. It's our most efficient land usage to expand these systems. I will note, to the Commission's credit, they have upped the size requirement, the expansion threshold that trips that. So an expansion that is up to 15 kilowatts does not impact does not trigger this rule. So this means that most residential customers will be able to expand their system as needed to electrify without running into this problem. But again, when we're talking about people who do not have access to rooftop solar, or we're talking about these larger projects, the best land use, least impact capacity is if you're taking a 150 to a 400, if you're maxing out that site. And the economics of doing that when you're taking that 6 cents a kilowatt hour hit on that existing project is really pretty prohibitive. We suggested during the rulemaking process that they could consider adjusters that were a weighted average of the historical and current adjusters. We understand that there's some complication in that, and some of the utilities were leery about having to implement that. I think, another approach that the PUC could take here is allowing a second production meter, essentially counting it as two separate net metered sites. So the old system continues to be financially viable, and the new expansion is still viable. Individuals are already able to participate in multiple net metering configurations in any case. So this is something that the utilities are capable of managing, having separate production meters there and separate adjusters for what's coming off both of those. In the interest of maintaining Vermonters' ability to access net metering, which is also one of the legislative priorities under 810, we would urge the commission to try and get creative on the problem solving here, to think about, let's waive single plant considerations in this circumstance so we can actually take advantage of these sites and in a way that allows expansions to happen. The rule right now, yes, it will allow people who own their own homes, who are lucky enough to have the space to expand those systems, will likely be able to do it because they won't be able to trigger that 15, they won't usually trigger that 15 kW expansion, but schools, businesses, renters who don't have the capacity to do this on their own rooftop, who are reliant on these community solar arrays, those sites are going to become harder to find because we won't be able to do these expansions that are highly efficient and desirable. So I'm happy to take any questions on either of those topics, or I know you have a number of other witnesses here today.
Any members? Senator Britt?
Quick question. You had mentioned local control, and are you task work on preferred sightings and allowing towns that have certified town energy element to gain substantial deference rather than due consideration before the board? Are you aware of any instances where this new rule you think will lead to conflicts with that empowered state that a municipality will have in suggesting preferred locations?
I will say that several of the sites that I looked at that I think would have triggered this rule, I believe they were all preferred sites by that joint designation process. I don't off the top of my head know how many of those were cited in towns that had an enhanced energy plan versus how much of that was an outside process, but I'd be happy to go back and look at that and see what I can figure out.
Other member? Okay, thank you. Stephen Crowley, Director of Vermont Community Solar Solutions.
There we go. Good morning. I'm Steve Crowley. I'm the director of the newly formed Vermont Community Solar Energy Association. Thanks for the opportunity to join you today. We're a statewide network of community solar subscribers, developers, and other interested people seeking ways to support this important aspect of our clean energy future. We believe that community solar plays a vital role, given that well more than half of all Vermonters do not have access to rooftop solar because of shade or other aspects of building ownership or construction. Community solar, whether a project is shared by a few or by 100 different off-takers, offers the opportunity to own a stake in the future, with the potential for long-term price stability and certainty about sourcing planet-friendly power. While traditional central power plants inherently demanded utility monopoly over production, today's technology offers the freedom of owning your own power. Now, especially as we electrify everything and our utilities are looking at extending that monopoly over all aspects of energy use, Community solar represents an important opportunity for Vermonters to control their own energy future. The subject of this set of proposed rule changes, net metering, has been the primary avenue for support of community solar. Through a series of more restrictive rulings over the last 2 decades, community solar is not the opportunity it once was. There are projects out there, but many individuals and families seeking to participate are deterred by the decreasing support from the PUC. This set of rule changes continues down that unfortunate road in ways we feel are arbitrary, prejudicial, and unjust. I'm going to focus on one element of the rules regarding new limitations on forest removal of area greater than 3 acres. First, let me be clear that there are plenty of high-quality forest areas that deserve this protection from net metered solar and indeed any other type of development. But if you live in Vermont, you know that not all forests are the same. While many forest areas possess high value for habitat or carbon storage, others do not. This rule lumps them all together. This rule defines a forest as any area where the tree crowns have greater than 10% coverage. That will include many areas that are really not the kind of forests that demand protection. We don't find anywhere in this rule or in the support materials the rationale for why they value the public purpose of why the valuable public purpose of net metered solar should be denied in all of these areas. In its background material, the PUC suggests that this is not a problem because the potential users or developers can simply use one of the other procurement programs to accomplish their goals. If other procurement methods, such as direct power purchase agreement with utility, would not face this 3-acre restriction, why would it apply only to net metered projects? This does not feel like forest protection to us. It feels like an arbitrary roadblock, discriminating against net metering and most importantly, against its potential users. Given that the vast majority of community solar projects are supported through the net metering approach, and that the majority of Vermonters will only achieve solar access through this, we see this as unfairly harming a large class of Vermonters. The PUC suggests that a shift to other approaches has already been happening. This comes as no surprise, considering that it is the past unfavorable actions of the PUC that have been forcing this shift. It does not mean that those other approaches are better. It means that the PUC's actions have already made net metering, particularly community net metering, more difficult. The Vermont Community Solar Association has come together in recognition of the widespread demand for better access to this important resource. We see this aspect of the rule changes as unreasonably and arbitrarily making access even more difficult. We urge Lcar to weigh in with his objection to this aspect of the proposed rule changes. Thank you for your time and consideration.
Thank you, Stephen. Committee members? All right, thank you.
Thank you.
Next up, Billy Coster, Director of Policy and Planning for Agency of Natural Resources. Morning. Morning. All yours.
Thank you for having me. This is Billy Coster, Director of Policy and Planning, Vermont Agency of Natural Resources. And I want to say up front, I appreciate this may be a bit unique for another agency testifying on a fellow agency's rule. But A&R has been deeply involved in this rulemaking process and has provided a lot of technical assistance to the Commission. And Mr. Marin suggested that we participate today, and I'm happy to do so, although he did an excellent job covering these topics. I'll provide a few brief prepared remarks and some data, and then happy to take any questions. The Agency of Natural Resources supports Rule 5.100 as proposed. The current version of the rule is a culmination of years of stakeholder engagement and many rounds of workshops, comments, and iterations of the rule. The rule is a reasonable compromise where no one party got everything they asked for. Forests are Vermont's most important tool to address climate change, both resilience and mitigation. The Vermont Climate Council found that Vermont's forests store on average over 18,000 million metric tons of carbon. And that once the state is successful in achieving all the carbon reduction targets set forth in the Global Warming Solutions Act, we will still need to maintain the majority of our current forest cover to achieve a net zero status by 2050. In addition to being a critical tool in the fight against climate change, forests provide a wide range of values to Vermonters, from clean air and clean water to flood storage, wildlife habitat, forest products, and they serve as the backbone of Vermont's world-class outdoor recreation economy. Maintaining Vermont's forests should be a priority as we shape programs to achieve the state's renewable energy goals. This is not an either-or conversation. We can and should do both. Consistent with that theme, Rule 5.100 modifies the definition of preferred site to exclude projects that require significant forest clearing. Significant forest clearing is defined as clearing more than 3 acres of forest. The state has long capped the size of net metered projects at 500 kilowatt in nameplate capacity. A 500 kW solar project has roughly a 3-acre footprint. So that significant forest clearing cap pairs nicely with the typical footprint of a 500 kW project. So this rule allows for the largest possible net metered solar project to clear forest on 100% of its footprint and still receive the preferred site incentive. This also means a 150 kW net metered project could clear more than twice its footprint and still not run afoul of this provision. This does not seem as an overly burdensome restriction. It's also important to highlight that the significant forest clearing provision only applies to net metered projects seeking the preferred site incentive. It does not affect net metered projects that do not seek that incentive or any other utility scale renewable energy generation project. And I have a few other comments on the preferred site, the background of preferred sites, but I think Mr. Marin covered them well. I'll wind my comments down by briefly sharing some relevant historic data. My agency has informally tracked forest clearing associated with energy projects since about 2016. The list of projects currently includes roughly 230 solar projects. Of that, 530 solar projects. Of that 530 projects, 213 of those involve some level of forest clearing. So just less than half involve some forest clearing. Of those 213, only 39 of those are net metered projects that involve more than 3 acres of clearing. 10 of those 39 slightly exceed the 3 acres and likely could have been designed to come in within that threshold. So that leaves fewer than 30 projects out of over 500 that we found would exceed this cap. And that number, importantly, does not include the thousands of residential scale and rooftop solar projects that the agency does not monitor. This is a long way of saying that this rule is targeted and really would only impact the most egregious projects that clear more forest than is reasonably appropriate to achieve their goal. From our perspective, the goal and effect of this provision is not to discourage net metering in Vermont, but rather to eliminate a siting incentive for the small subset of projects that have an outside impact on Vermont's forests. Given that, the agency supports the rule as proposed, and thank you for your consideration.
Senator Brake.
Good morning, Mr. Coughlin. Quick question. There was some folks have raised a concern over the definition of forest, like we're protecting land of sort of marginal value. Can you just say a little bit about how forest is defined and how obviously you're supporting the rules, you must find an appropriate definition, but you could just explain the definition and why you think it's appropriate.
Certainly. So I'll first say that the Public Utility Commission's criteria through Title 30, Section 248 has a number of considerations that get to some of the issues that Mr. Dowd spoke to, the impacts on habitat, natural communities, the functions and values that forests and other sorts of habitat can provide. And the PUC always looks at those impacts no matter what sort of project is coming before them. What we're talking about today is an incentive program. So it is less of a site-specific value-based analysis than a directive, a policy directive to incentivize certain types of projects. So we used a general, hopefully easy to calculate definition of forests that was largely taken from the U.S. Forest Service. And what it does is say, to even be considered forest that's clear, the area needs to be greater than an acre, because anything less than that, we're basically saying is not worth calculating at this time. And that acre needs to have at least 10% crown cover of trees, and needs to be at least 120 feet wide and 120 feet long. So we're not talking about thin hedgerows, lines of trees between a road and a field. These are areas that have enough continuity and area to constitute a forest that the average person would say, hey, that's a forest versus that's a few trees. It wasn't easy. I would love to have said, a forest when you see it. We tried that approach in earlier iterations of the rule, and rightfully so. Parties wanted more detail and a more clear way to calculate it. So we did our best working with the commission to come up with that definition. Is it perfect? Probably not, but I think it's one that folks could easily calculate and replicate.
Yeah. When you see it didn't work out that well for the Supreme Court either.
No.
Thanks.
Board members? Thank you, Billy.
Thank you.
Okay, and next up, Stephen Bushman, Dam Safety Engineer, Department of Environmental Conservation.
Thank you. I need to clarify something really fast. I no longer work for Dam Safety. I retired 7 years ago, but I was in front of this committee before I retired with the Dam Safety unsafe revolving loan fund rule. So I think I somehow got locked into a database with that. I'm really testifying as a citizen today.
I appreciate the explanation.
Sure. I appreciate the fact that you still remember me from that. So, I'm trying to keep this. I realize that as a past engineer, I might get a little bit too technical in these comments, and so please, at the end, I would be happy to try to answer any clarifying questions that you might have. But so first of all, good morning. My name is Stephen Bushman, and I am testifying as a citizen, as we cleared up. I am the owner of a small residential net metering system that was commissioned on June 1st, 2018. I am also a ratepayer and a net metering customer of the Vermont Washington Electric Co-op. I thank the commission for taking my testimony on these very important rules. I'm going to put my reading glasses on, I'm sorry. My testimony today focuses on two areas. First, I would like to focus on revisions to the fixed costs, which are also known as fees, that are found in electric companies' net metering tariffs. And secondly, I would like to focus on modifying the definition of the blended residential rate, which is also found in the rules. So first, the revisions to the net metering fixed costs. Again, they're also known as fees in the rules. I call them fixed costs. The rule as proposed requires an electric company to file a new tariff compliance filing an EPCU by June 15th of each even number year to revise their net metering tariffs to incorporate the new values set forth by the commission in its biennial update. And those values are typically the blended residential rate, statewide rate average, and the adjusters. But the new tariff filing cannot include any other proposed changes to the electric company's net metering tariff. So the language in the proposed rule does not address how revisions to an electric company's net metering fixed costs should be filed even though net metering fees are allowed by 30 VSA 8010 and Rule 5.100, which requires the fees to be reasonable. Some electric companies include net metering fixed costs in class rate revisions filings subject to 30 VSA 2226B, while others submit new case filings separately solely for revisions to net metering fixed costs. To date, both types of filings have been accepted by PCU. Now, on this past September 12, 2023, the PUC issued an order approving a blended residential rate calculation case number 23-1682. And in this order, the Department of Public Service states that the department argues that the commission has not established that net metering customers constitute a distinct class or division of ratepayers under rate design tariffs that are subject to 30 VSA 226B. So I believe this interpretation of that statute requires electric companies to file revisions to their net metering fixed costs in new tariff filing cases and not include these fixed costs in rate case revision subject to VSA 226B. And why is this change necessary? Well, WEX, just as an example, WEX net metering tariff has the following fixed costs in it. It has a monthly account maintenance fee, it has a one-time account setup fee, and it has a production meter cost and installation charge. Several other electric companies have monthly fees and setup fees and all have meter installation charges defined in their net metering tariffs. Determining if the net metering fixed cost revision is reasonable, if it is included in one of these big these class rate cases simply is not possible, since class rate cases require an identical percentage increase across the board, sometimes as high as 15, 18%, mostly due to electric supply costs. These are your general tariff increases that you see all the time. Utilities are applying for these all the time now. But separate tariff filings are needed for these net metering fixed costs to ensure that they are properly invested and to ensure that net metering customers and others have the opportunity to comment on the reasonableness of the net metering fixed costs found in net metering tariffs. I asked the committee to require PUC to include language in this proposed rule to require new and separate tariff filings for revisions to net metering fixed costs. So my second focus area is the definition of blended residential rate, but it's also focused more on the deletion of Part 3, which is the pertaining to weighted statewide average. Blended residential rate as defined and the use of the weighted statewide average is a complex part of the rule and affects some net metering customers negatively depending on your electric company and the electric rates they charge. An electric company uses a statewide average if it is lower than their blended residential rate. I believe this creates an inherent inequity in the net metering rule that penalizes customers just because they are served by a utility, an electric company with rates higher than the statewide average. My written testimony that I submitted earlier states that the most net metering ratepayers get full or close to a blended residential rates, and that only one electric company uses the statewide average. It was actually pointed out to me, thankfully, thanks to Jake, it was pointed out to me that actually two companies use the statewide average, Green Mountain Power and Washington Electric Co-op, with a third possibly starting to use it in January of 2024. I'm a little hazy on that one yet. But anyway, it is important to note that based on the most recent 2022 biennial update figures that the weighted statewide average is 97% of Green Mountain Power's blended residential rate, while it is only 88% of WEC's calculated blended rate. This is not surprising since Green Mountain Power's residential rate accounts for 76% of the statewide rated average, while the rest of the utilities account for the 24%. In August of 2016, I'm going back to when this definition was first came about, or at least it was revised. In August of 2016, the PUC issued an order on reconsideration for the current net metering rule, which is the one effective now, January 1st, 2017. In that order, PUC stated, in practice, the weighted statewide average rate acts as a cap on the value of net metering credits. In the same 2016 order, the PUC stated that the primary reason for this rate structure is to promote an even pace of development across various utility service territories, and that using a statewide blended residential rate as a cap for the value of net metering credit will help ensure that development is not focused in any one service territory. There was also the concern that using the above average rates could have an adverse effect on rates in the service territories of electrical companies with higher than average retail rates compared to other service territories. So my question is, are these original assumptions from 2016 still valid because of subsequent decisions by PUC and by the current legislation intent pertaining to renewables and required greenhouse gas emissions reductions? Since the effective date of the rule, June 1st, 2017, there have been 3 biennial updates, each which have decreased the value of a net metering credit. Additionally, many net metering customers are approaching the end of the 10-year period when both solar energy credits or positive adjusters will go to zero. So that's also going to decrease the value of the net metering credits. I realize that the deletion of the weighted statewide average from the blended residential rate definition may be beyond the scope of this particular rulemaking session. If so, I believe it is important to require PUC to open an investigation to thoroughly evaluate the weighted statewide average to determine if it is still valid and if a rule change should be made at a future date to delete it. Thank you. And my written comments do have more detail, but I'm certainly willing to answer questions. Please try to.
Ready? Thank you, Stephen.
Okay, thank you.
Next up, Michelle Paya.
Hi, good morning. Thank you very much for giving me the opportunity to speak today. I'm Michelle Paya. My husband and I own a small business in Georgia, Vermont, along with a solar array that provides renewable energy to our small business, our home, and a small business in our local community. In May of 2022, we applied for an amendment certificate of public good for an expansion to our current solar array, bringing it to a 500 kW system. During this time, we consulted with the Vermont Public Utility Commission, PUC, and were instructed to submit an amended application. As of today, we still have not received our CPG, although we were asked to submit it by the PUC as that amended application. We have been placed on an indefinite stay. We've had no communication or timeline from the PUC of how this will move forward. We are now approaching, or actually we've passed our 19th month since we submitted our application. Throughout the 19 months, we've provided the PUC site documentation, preferred site permitting from the town of Georgia, which I would like to note that the preferred siting incentive is actually a negative adjustment. We've provided all the environmental eligibility requirements. We've provided testimony and many other informational and document requests from the PUC. These requests were made on a timeline in which we were held accountable to meet that time frame. However, throughout this process, PUC has never been on a timeline with their responsibilities to communicate or move forward with the application process in a reasonable and expected timeline, leaving Vermont applicants such as myself in the dark and unable to move forward with important projects for our economy and our environment. We are in full agreement that the PUC needs to be mindful and responsible for approving permits that provide good to the Vermont economy and communities. We understand that net metering process is under scrutiny and being evaluated for change. However, these changes should not come on the backs of Vermonters to delay their projects while the PUC debates what rules should be. The amendment process is clearly outlined within the PUC's net metering rule. However, it is not transparent that the PUC has discretion to revisit on how to apply this rule. The new rule you're reviewing allows the PUC to put cases on hold indefinitely so that it can be considered whether it should be adopted the rule in the first place or so much in our case. I wonder, why do we have rules at all if they're not looked at and upheld? Since May of 2022, we have seen significant increases in the cost to construct our expansion, from interest rates, construction and labor rates, and equipment costs. These ranges of an increase of 20 to 30%. We have equipment that was purchased that is sitting in a field degrading in functionality and value each day, with the hope that maybe we will see information soon and carry forth with our project. As a small rural business, we seek ways to diversify our income, our revenue, so longevity is an option. And we may continue to serve and employ Vermonters. We strive to be reasonable and seek ways to contribute to saving our environment so the next generation can have the same quality of life that we've all been fortunate to have. We support the Vermont Comprehensive Energy Plan by participating in renewable energy and moving towards the goals of 90% renewables by 2050. We have done our part and willing to put our resources to work for the state of Vermont in renewable energy creation. When will the PUC do their part and fulfill their obligation in reasonable timelines so we all may get on with what needs to be done? 19 months or more for permitting is a disgrace, and the state is failing their citizens. I'm asking you to make sure that this new rule in net metering does not allow the PUC to use net metering applications to create new policy, not expressly stated in the rule itself. Thank you.
Thank you. Right. Representative Hickman.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Michelle, I'm just curious, you made a comment about your preferred site is a negative adjustment. What does that mean?
Correct. So when you are, when you go for the preferred siting and you receive the preferred siting, it's a 4-cent decrease on the blended rate. So it's a 4-cent penalty, negative adjustment.
Okay, got
So
it.
when they say incentive, it's not truly incentive when it's a negative amount.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank
Thank you.
Maya, Miriam? Please correct me if I was wrong in that.
It's Maria. Hi, everyone. My name is Maria Miriam. I'm a resident of Orange County, a farm worker in Stratford, a farmer of certified organic vegetables and flowers. And I am speaking about the 3-acre limitation on forest clearing, which I oppose as a farmer, as a biologist, and as a young person. When I first moved back to Vermont a number of years ago, knowing that I wanted to farm, I knew that it was going to be a lot of hard work. I figured that I would have to work for someone else and try to save money and also work for myself at the same time and build a brand and a business. And I hoped that if I did that, I would be able to afford some land of my own to farm at some point. I'm now in my 5th eggnog season at the farm and creamery I work at. I make $19 an hour, no benefits except for overtime. And I am paid better than almost any other farm worker I know. That is a really good wage for a farm worker. At the same time, a couple months ago, someone sent me a link to a 75-acre property in Thetford that was considered really cheap because it was next to the interstate, and that was $483,000. We don't have to get into the details, but the math for a $500,000 mortgage and $19 an hour just doesn't line up. So right now I am farming on 3 fields in both Orange and Windsor counties. We're just trying to cobble together the land access that I can find from people who are willing to let me farm on their land, so that I have, anywhere to farm. In a state that's 80% forested, there's a lot of pressure on that last 20% of open land. For me, I'm not even looking at prime ag land. I'm looking at anything available that I can grow stuff in. And this rule to limit forest clearing really limits the local control and decision-making on what towns might want to do with that last 20%. They might want to towns might want to say, we want to promote local energy, renewable energy generation, and we want small farmers to have land access so that we can have an agricultural economy. But this rule is really steering net metering sites into competition with small farms for that space. And I know there's a discussion about, well, maybe it's not necessary to clear any forested areas due to lack of eligible sites for net metering projects and stuff. And I'm just here to say there are not many eligible clear sites out there within my price range, and to put more competition against those sites by having net metering also be looking at those sites would be a real challenge. We're also just doing this for scientifically arbitrary reasons. I have an environmental biology degree from Columbia University, and I know that not all forests are the same. This rule treats early successional forests that might be full of invasives as the exact same as a pristine forest block, super high quality late successional forest. It's also, yes, in terms of our natural ecology, Vermont has traditionally been a very forested state. We've also been a mosaic landscape. It's disingenuous to say that a poorly managed, poor quality forest is necessarily better than an open field full of native asters and goldenrod and milkweed. And it's not grounded in factual basis. I know Mr. Marin was talking about that we can't compare acre by acre carbon sequestration of net metering and forest because that doesn't look at the other ecological benefits that those forests might include. But if we're not assessing forest quality, then we're not looking at those ecological benefits. And functionally, that makes this a primarily aesthetic rule, and a rule that says, well, forests are good regardless of their quality. we're already assessing forest quality through, through looking at preferred siting and stuff. We can assess the forest quality. And if we, make this rule so that it is looking not just on sheer acreage of forest, but the quality of that forest, then it's based in a scientific reality and a factual basis. Lastly, as a young person, I'm already farming in climate disaster. I had fields that flooded this summer. I had crops that were at 60% of the yield that I expected because the sun never shone this summer. This rule, I feel like, protects an idea of what Vermont used to be and what Vermont is supposed to look like, over making a livable future for young people, for small businesses, for small farmers. We need to be able to afford to farm here. We need to be able to, A, afford the land, and B, be able to afford to keep going because we're not having a climate disaster every single summer. I really wanted to move back here because I wanted to be part of a vibrant community full of young people who cared about continuing our agricultural traditions. And it feels like this rule goes against that. So I would ask that you please reject this rule provision about the forest clearing for further study, because it arbitrarily treats all forested areas as if they're the same and doesn't assess forest quality. And it will really negatively impact farms and small businesses, especially young farmers who don't have land access, and folks in the eastern part of the state, like Orange and Windsor counties, where it's already really heavily forested counties. Thank you. Happy to answer anything.
Senator Bray.
Just a quick question. I'm not, could you help me understand better the connection between farming and an array?
Basically, my thought is that, we're already 80% forest cover on this state, right? So in that last 20%, if I want to go farm something, I don't want to clear a bunch of forest because then I have to stump it. The soil isn't going to be great. For wanting to farm, I'm looking at already open land, right? And it is already really hard to find that already open land. So if we put, I'm already in competition with people who want to develop it for housing, affordable or otherwise, et cetera, to steer more arrays into that same really limited available open land is just going to make it more competitive and harder for farmers to access that land. Does that answer your question? Or are you missing something?
Not quite. I mean, for instance, if I think of farms I know that have solar, many of them use barns or buildings, things like that. So what I'm not quite navigating here is how the limitation to clear will affect a farm.
So it's not that I want to create an array. I don't have that money. I am saying that if we are trying to increase our renewable energy grid, then in order to do that, there's a certain number of sites that are going to have to be developed for arrays, et cetera. And if the available sites to put those arrays on, if that availability pool is dramatically shrunk, and those sites are sort of only allowed in the same places where I might be also looking for land to farm, then you're putting young farmers in competition with developers who might, who want to build an array, say. Whereas developers might be, if there's a recently logged clearing with some saplings, that's not valuable to me as agricultural land, but that could be very valuable for an array. Does that make sense?
Sure, thanks so much.
Yeah, of course.
No, I just want to say thank you. I understand the concern you're expressing. It's folks in my district who have run into this situation, so.
Yes.
Thank you. Harris Rome, licensed forester for Long Meadow Resource Management. Can't hear you.
There, how is that?
That's good.
Okay, thank you. Thank you for letting me testify here today in front of the committee. As you said, my name is Harris Rowan. I'm a licensed forester here in the state of Vermont, and I'm here to talk about the 3-acre limit rule. I think that is not a good rule. I think that there are, I'm very concerned with forest protection as a forester, so I can understand where the committee is coming from making that rule. I think Vermont has better mechanisms for protecting forest land in place now, such as the current use program, primarily the work that the different conservation organizations do in land protection. I think those are, the efforts that are making a difference. Not allowing a solar array to clear a relatively small amount of acreage, I think, is maybe working around the edges of that, but not having a big impact. I would also say that the definition of the forest with a 10% crown coverage is too broad, I guess is the word. That could be a field with a few trees in it for shade. 10% crown cover is very low in my mind. So I don't think that really defines a forest very well. I would be in favor of a rule that said, if the clearing is above 3 acres, then there is a process, as some of the other people have said today, a process to determine the value of that forest, for wildlife, for timber, for water impacts, all those things. So if there's a process to evaluate the forest, that would make sense. I don't think it should just be a clear cutoff at 3 acres. So I'll try to keep this short. That's really all I have to say. Unless there are any questions, I'd be happy to take some.
All right.
Thanks for your testimony. So in the current application process, is there a site visit that determines the quality of the forest land being, that would be impacted by the development?
A site visit for a solar array?
Yeah, I mean, I'm wondering if you're saying it's simply calling it forest and the criteria are maybe not ideal from your point of view, for instance, 10% crown cover. Are you saying there's not a specific enough evaluation? There's another process that should be used so that we get a better read on how valuable that resource is and whether or not it should be protected in that way?
Yeah, I think there's two things there. One, the definition of a forest. For example, the current use program defines a forest by at least 350 trees per acre. So I don't know if that's necessarily the right, criteria in this case, but it could be that with a combination of crown cover and maybe, a few other things like the linear dimensions, which is already mentioned in your rule, which I think does make sense. So I think it could be defined better with other criteria. And I haven't been present for a site visit for solar development, so I'm not really sure the answer to the other question.
And the last quick question, did you participate in the hearings that went along with this rulemaking and discuss the definition of solars and how to more appropriately, I guess you might say, evaluate the value of that site as forest? Just wondering if the PUC heard from you before.
No, this is my first time giving testimony on this.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, thank you. James Antel?
Hi, can you hear me?
Yep.
My name is Reverend Dr. Jim Antal, and I live in Norwich. I'm a minister in the United Church of Christ. For the past 5 years, I've served as special advisor on climate justice to the national head of the United Church of Christ. My 2018 book, Climate Church, Climate World, has been read by hundreds of congregations throughout the country. Our property in Norwich has 2 solar trackers, and we also participate in the community solar array located in Norwich on Union Village Road. In the following, I should say the following Norwich residents join me in signing on to my brief comments. Their names are Linwood Andrews, Suzanne Leiter, and Linda Gray. The proposal to prohibit community solar arrays, if they involve cutting down 3 acres or more of trees, is a bad idea for at least the following reasons, some of which have been already articulated. The proposal goes against science, as Jonathan Dowds and Myra Miriam so clearly articulated. In New England, an array of solar panels reduces CO2 emissions by a much, much greater amount than any forest occupying the same acreage. Second reason. Furthermore, the efficiency of solar panels is increasing at an astonishing rate, and this is expected to continue for many years to come. That means that with each passing year, the alleged science behind the proposed rule would become increasingly unjustifiable. Third, local communities need encouragement and flexibility, not more limitations, when they seek to identify preferred sites for community solar arrays. Fourth, the need to immediately increase Vermont's community solar arrays could not be more urgent. Scientists have already confirmed that 2023 will be the hottest year since records have been kept. And November 17th, 2023 was the first day in Earth's history when global warming passed 2 degrees Celsius above pre-industrial levels. And for my final point, I want to say that protecting Vermont forests is, of course, a worthy goal. The Public Utility Commission, the Vermont State Legislature, and the governor have the opportunity to implement many worthy goals by creating rules and laws that will result in rapidly electrifying everything using clean, renewable energy sources. This is a huge opportunity for Vermont because Vermont is blessed to be one of the few places in the United States where the impact of climate change will be addressable. Vermont can create a future that will welcome a substantial number of climate migrants. The power to make that a reality will come from a rapid and universal transition to a clean, renewable energy sources. Thank you for the opportunity to comment, and I'd be glad to respond to any questions.
Thank you. Committee members? All right, thank you very much. I'd like to make a proposal. Are there any general questions at the committee before I speak? We have 2 committee members absent today. One is Ken Van Hill. One is stuck in Pakistan, I guess, from what I understand, and is unable to connect to our meeting. We've also had a couple of other committee members that have been heavily involved in other work in the last week and a half. And we've had conversations about maybe providing a little bit more time to sort of take in the testimony that we've heard and to come back at a future meeting and make a decision about how we want to proceed. I don't think I need a motion, but is anyone?
Can I just give you a little bit of information?
You can.
Okay, great.
So the 45.
Okay. I'm going.
Okay, great. So long as you know you need an extension.
Okay. Yeah. Ledge Council is pointing out to me that our next meeting will not be till January 4th, and we'll need an extension from the PUC in order to accommodate this.
I don't think think the commission will have any problem granting that extension. I will email Althea as soon as I confirm that.
We'll go back and forth on the communication requirements to do that. Appreciate that, okay? So, Senator Bray.
Well, then, thank you, Mr. Chair. So I would move that we postpone action on Rule 23P19 until our next meeting. That was January 4th, right?
Bray is off of the motion. Any discussion?
Given what's intervening between now and the 4th, I would suggest that we ask to extend it to the 11th. And I don't know whether that's something that you had thought about.
We worked that out.
So I would say that Senator Bray's motion to postpone action can take you to the plan to take this up on January 4th, but having heard the concerns of the committee, what Charlene and I will do when we work with Jake and the PUC is to try and secure an extension of the 45 days until January 11th. One thing that will not be an issue with that extension is the PUC still has plenty of time on its 8-month adoption. That's not up until the 23rd of February. So we will try and get you until the 11th, knowing that that then gives you the ability to take the rule up on the 4th or not, and then have that second meeting on the 11th if need be. That cover the bases?
Sounds great.
Okay, Charlene and I will do our best. She's the
Senator Bray.
Yeah, thanks, Senator Lyons. It is going to be like opening day, so it could be a little hard to pull both off at once. Thanks.
Yeah, Representative Bonner.
I would like to have Billy Coster just answer one question. Is that, do you want to wait into the, or we kind of pass the time for clarification?
Why don't we take up the motion and do that?
Okay.
Continue to ask that question. I don't think that's out of order. Any discussion around the motion? All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Floor is yours.
It's clear, you talked about there being some, and I'm new to this whole discussion. I haven't been through this before. But you talked about the 500 kilowatt hours as being, there being some sort of cutoff. And I want to make sure I understand how. And you also said, I think, that the normally 3 acres is what it takes to accommodate the 500. Tell me about the 500 kilowatt cutoff and what developers can do. How does that?
Billy Coster, Agency of Natural Resources. Mr. Marin may be the best resource for that, but either in statute or rule, Vermont has capped net metering at 500 kilowatts per customer. So if you want to generate more energy beyond that amount, you need to do it through a different program, either standard offer, direct power purchase agreement, utilities, any range of options. But the net metering program and the incentivized rates that are associated with it are limited to up to 500 kilowatts of generation per customer.
Okay, and just so I understand that, I take it then to your position, the position of the PUC is that the 3 acres of forest land rule will not negatively impact the ability to build installations of up to 500 kilowatts.
That is a ballpark of what 500, every site's different. So there's some, some will be bigger, some may be smaller. But that incentivize, our position is if you're going to incentivize these with a preferred site rate, that, that's a reasonable cap for forest.
Thank you. I want to make sure I understood that now, how it all comes together. Yeah.
Sure. Okay, next on the agenda is 23, Rule 23P15, NGSA Appendix 44, fur-bearing species. Committee discussion, Department of Fish and Wildlife Board response to Lcar's objections. I have a discussion and then move on from there. I would like at this time give the department an opportunity to speak. We've been at this for almost a couple months now. We've had extensive discussion, debate, back and forth between the committee and the department, and consequently with the board, Fish and Wildlife Board. At our last meeting, there were 4 items that we objected to, and there was discussion between the department and the board, and our response I guess I'll paraphrase a little bit here and say that the board declined to respond to our objections. And so I think that's where we're at this point in time. Catherine.
I think since we've been here quite often, I don't want to take up a lot of your time, but I would just offer my presence for questions. And if there's anything that's helpful to you, just, let me know and I'll try to review it with you.
Okay, would committee members have any questions for the council?
I'll ask a quick question. I did not listen to or view or wasn't at the board meeting where our objections were discussed. And I'm wondering if there's any indication from board members or the board as a whole that there would be a further discussion about our objections and any possible resolution or compromise that you could see from the board.
I think it's unlikely. We are having a meeting tonight just to, review whatever happens today and also to ask the board whether they want us to proceed with filing the rule.
Representative Higley.
Mr. Chair, thank you. I guess I'm a little bit confused. I am looking at a November 30th letter from the Fish and Wildlife Department talking about the board looking at our November 16th Lcar objections. So I thought I just heard twice that they didn't consider the objections.
Oh, they considered them. They didn't make any adjustments to our, didn't respond in that way.
Just want to be clear.
Okay, all right. Thank you. Senator Bray.
Yeah, before we proceed, I just want to reiterate my appreciation for his work and commissioners and the board and everyone. A lot of people put a lot of effort into this, and I appreciate all that and the care that's gone into the back and forth.
Thank you. I appreciate that.
Do you want to speak to the process? Okay.
So let me see if I get all the dates right. At your November 16th meeting, you moved to approve the rule as it had been presented by the board, including the change on seeking landowner permission, which had not formally been a proposed modification, but had been expected to be a proposed modification. You moved to approve the rule with those proposed modifications, except as otherwise objected to. And then there were 4 objections. Those were to section 3.2, the definition of trapping, on the ground that it was contrary to the intent of the General Assembly, to add the word hunt to the definition. You objected to section 3.14B, a portion of the definition of public trail, on the ground that this portion of the definition is contrary to the intent of the General Assembly, to include all trails not to include all trails where persons may reasonably be expected to recreate. Section 4.15 on the trapping setbacks with respect to traps in the water or under ice, and section 3.6 and 4.20 on the definition of control of dogs for purposes of taking coyote with the aid of dogs, that it was inconsistent with legislative intent. So the board had 14 days to respond. They did that. That's the November 30th letter that Representative Higley referenced. The board is now in a position where they can move forward and adopt the rule because they responded within the 14 days. However, Lcar is in a position to determine what should be done with those 4 outstanding objections. Options under the APA are to withdraw the objection, to modify the objection somehow. I think that's less likely given the fact that you've split it into 4 objections, or to certify one or more of those objections. In order to certify the objection, it requires, just like the original objection itself, that there be a majority vote of Lcar, not of members present. So that's going to be 5 members of Lcar needing to vote to move to file the objection in certified form with the Secretary of State. If that happens on any of those objections, Representative Squirrel will send a letter to the Secretary of State noting the fact that the objections should be filed in certified form. And then that triggers a couple things. It shifts the burden of proof if there is ever litigation challenging the rule, and it requires that notification of that certified objection be on copies of the rule that are made available to the public. And that's both going to be the version that's made available by the board and the version that's made available by the Secretary of State in the official Code of Vermont rules. So your decision point now with respect to each of those 4 objections is going to be withdraw, modify, or move to file in certified form. And the move to file in certified form is going to take at least 5 members voting. And I would recommend that you do each of those as its own motion. So 4 votes, 4 motions to either withdraw, modify, or file in certified form.
Representative Baumgartner.
Chair, to get things started, I move that we file the objection to section 3.20, the definition of trapping, on the ground that is contrary to the intent of the General Assembly to add the word hunt to the definition. And we do it in certified form to the Secretary of State.
There's a motion. Representative Higley.
Mr. Chair, I would like to make a substitute motion to approve the initial rule in regards to the previous motion, basically based on the November 30th response. While there was no changes, I certainly believe that the objections were considered and pretty extensively explained as to why they weren't changed, also even referencing case law. So again, I would ask for a substitute motion to move that.
Yes.
Can I just paraphrase? I think what you are doing is you are moving to withdraw all 4 objections.
I am, but I thought we had to do it one at a time.
Okay, so you're moving to withdraw the first objection.
If I can make that motion to withdraw all of them at this time.
I think you could. It sounded like those sort of go back to the original version, but I think it would be cleaner to do it one at a time. But it's your motion.
Why don't I do it all 4? Because I know how the results is going to end up. So I appreciate a time-sensitive issue here, but that's my motion. My substitute motion is to withdraw all of Lcar's 4 objections for the reasons I just stated. As far as their explanation as to why the board didn't consider the changes, with even providing case law and, the reasons for not supporting the objection.
So the vote is on Senator McDonald.
So the motion made by Representative not to pass, then the next vote would be on the motion as offered by Representative.
That's the way I understand it.
Yeah, so there's the motion.
The vote is on the substitute motion.
On whether to substitute, and then it'll be on if you substitute.
Any more discussion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed? Say
Nay.
No.
Thank you, Representative Victor. Okay, next we have the motion, the original motion from Representative Baumgartner. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed?
No.
Thank you. Motion passes. Representative Baumgartner.
I move that we file the objection to section 3.14B, a portion of the definition of public trail on the ground that it's contrary to the intent of the General Assembly not to include all trails where persons may reasonably be expected to recreate, and we do so in certified form with the Secretary of State.
We have a motion. Discussion. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed?
No.
Motion passes. Senator Bray.
Mr. Chair, I move that we file in certified form the objection to portion 4.15, trapping setbacks that accepts from the setback requirements traps set in the water or under ice on the ground that is contrary to the intent of the General Assembly to exempt traps set in the water or under ice from setback requirements and to do so in certified form with the Secretary of State.
We have a motion from Senator Bray. Discussion. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed?
No.
Motion passes. Senator Bray.
Mr. Chair, I move that we file the objection to sections 3.6, definition of control of dogs, and 4.20, taking coyote with aid of dogs, on the ground that it's contrary to the intent of the General Assembly to allow the taking of coyote with aid of dogs unless there is a required means of controlling dogs that sufficiently minimizes the risk that dog pursuing coyote will enter onto land that is posted against hunting, enter onto land where pursuit of coyote with dogs is not authorized, harass or harm people or domestic animals, and cause other unintentional damages to people or property. I move that we certify this in, file this in certified form with the Secretary of State.
Have a motion from Senator Bray. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed?
No.
Thank you, committee. As Pledge Council indicated, we'll be sending a letter along to the department with this information. We also, there's a section in there about the moratorium to position on that.
Okay, thank you.
Okay.
Appreciate it.
Yeah, I think I just made passing reference to the moratorium issue, so I think maybe I'll expand on that a little bit. And I just want to read what is in the letter we put together. Members of Lcar voted to file the fourth objection in certified form of the opinion that the fourth objection being filed in certified form shifts the burden of proof to the Fish and Wildlife Department in any action for judicial review or for enforcement of the rule related to sections 3.6, 4.20, C3 VSA 842 C2, and should be interpreted as evidence that the current moratorium on pursuing coyote with the aid of dogs is not lifted upon the effective date of the November 30th, 2023 rule, if adopted, because section 3.6 and 4.2 of the November 30th rule do not meet the minimum requirements of the rules required by sections 3 of Act 165, specifically sections, 3B4, and therefore the triggering event for the repeal of the moratorium in Act 165, section 2B has not been met. And that's in the letter to the department. And I believe you all have copies of that. That's okay. Any other business? Great.
I just wanted to, thank you, Mr. Chair. On the time I've been on Lcar, I've not observed maybe too many rules that came through with more back and forth between parties. And just thank you for managing it so well. There's plenty of controversy involved, and I appreciate that the process was thorough and gave all parties a chance to really speak up and present their cases and keep everything civil and timely. So thank you.
We are adjourned.